The light in Marian Pierce's kitchen was still on when the turquoise Chevrolet Bel Air pulled away from Crescent, Oregon, a mountain town of fewer than 1,200 residents. That October evening was cold and damp, with fog from the lake blanketing the dirt road leading south. At 7:18 p.m., Marian's neighbor Ruth Cramer saw three friends, Marian, Howard Lane and Caleb Dunn, get into the car, carrying a picnic basket and a camera, saying they were headed for a picnic at Crescent Lake. She still vividly recalls Marian's smile through the misty window, her hand waving, the red scarf fluttering lightly in the fog, like a final streak of color against the cold, gray night. What happened in the next 3 hours would haunt Crescent for 4 decades. Before we dive into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you're drawn to forgotten journeys for justice, don't forget to subscribe to catch the next part. Crescent, Oregon, nestled among pine forests and misty lakes, was quiet, almost frozen in time, during the late fall of 1984. That afternoon, no one paid much attention as the turquoise Chevrolet Bel Air rolled off the main street. Behind the wheel was Howard Lane, 68, a retired mechanic who still fixed cars for the town. Beside him sat Marian Pierce, 41, an elementary school teacher with a habit of documenting every trip with her film camera. In the back seat, Caleb Dunn, 45, a lumber mill worker, carried a thick jacket and a box of sandwiches his wife had prepared. They told a few acquaintances they were going for a picnic at Crescent Lake, taking advantage of the calm before the seasonal rains. The sky that day was clear and cold, the late sunlight reflecting off the lake like a silver mirror. As the car turned off Highway 97 onto the dirt path toward the lake, no one thought it would be the last time they were seen. Night fell, the fog thickened, and the town's lights gradually dimmed. Marian's house on Pine Street sat at the corner, its window glowing late into the night, golden light seeping through the curtains as if someone were still awake. The next morning, the light was still on. On the kitchen table, a cold coffee mug, a half-cut loaf of bread, and a scarf draped over a chair. Howard didn't show up at the garage as usual, his truck still parked silently in front of his house. Caleb didn't make it to his morning shift, and the mill foreman's calls to his home went unanswered, met only by an empty ring. Neighbors started asking questions. A few recalled seeing the turquoise car on the trail the previous night, but no one was certain of the time. When worry outgrew patience, Marian's family drove to the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office, clutching a photo of the three taken the previous summer, along with details of the car and their departure time, to report them missing. In the small duty room of the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office, the morning shift officer reviewed the report and passed it to Sergeant Harold Mercer. The thin sheet of paper held just a few lines: 3 missing, turquoise Chevrolet Bel Air, last seen leaving Crescent the previous afternoon. Mercer glanced at the clock, 7:40 a.m. He folded the report, called investigator Neil Proctor, who covered the town's southern area, and ordered him to the scene immediately. Crescent was still half asleep, blanketed in thick fog. When Proctor pulled up to Marian Pierce's house, the kitchen light was still on. He knocked several times, no answer. The door was unlocked, its hinges creaking as it opened. Inside, the house was tidy, a cold coffee mug on the dining table, a scarf draped over a chair, and a radio on the shelf playing softly. No signs of a struggle, no displaced items. He snapped a few photos, noting light on, house unlocked, no evidence of violence. In the bedroom, the bed was made, blankets neatly folded, closet doors closed. Everything suggested the owner had stepped out briefly. Leaving Marian's house, Proctor stopped by Howard Lane's place down the street. The garage was open, the truck parked neatly, tools arranged in order. Keys hung on a hook, indicating Howard hadn't left in that vehicle. The neighbor, Ruth Cramer, said she saw Howard leave around 5 p.m. the previous day, wearing a brown coat, with Marian and Caleb Dunn. They seemed cheerful, she said. I thought they were just going fishing. Proctor jotted it down, asking, "Did you see the car return?" She shook her head. He continued to the Chemalt gas station, where the road to Crescent Lake intersected Highway 97. The night shift attendant confirmed, "Yeah, they stopped for gas around 8 p.m. Old car, turquoise, Oregon plates." He recalled an older man driving, with a woman and a younger man. They said they were heading to the lake, would be back early. No one saw them after that. Proctor noted the time, requested the gas receipt, and returned to the station. Sergeant Mercer spread a map of the area on the table, marking points in red: Marian's house, Howard's house, Chemalt gas station, Crescent Lake. He ordered the patrol team to check the entire dirt road to the lake. That afternoon, 3 officers arrived at the old boat dock, where locals once moored fishing boats. The winding road was muddy, the air cold with pine-scented wind. Along the water's edge, they found faint tire tracks, leading toward the lake, but not deep enough to identify the vehicle. No skid marks, no metal fragments, no dropped items. An officer measured the distance, sketched the scene, and took Polaroid photos. Dusk fell quickly, fog rolling in thickly, and they returned before night engulfed them. In the office, blurry photos were pinned to the investigation board, connected by red lines tracing the presumed route, from Marian's house to the gas station, then toward Crescent Lake. Mercer reviewed the initial report, signed it, and assigned a case number. Missing adults, Case 84, 2197. In the final notes, Proctor wrote, "No evidence of foul play, accident possibility undetermined. Vehicle and victims still missing." At 8 p.m., the small sheriff's office fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock. Outside, fog from the lake rose, swallowing the last streetlights of Crescent. The disappearance was officially logged, launching an investigation with no end in sight. The morning after missing adults, Case 84, 2197, was filed. Sergeant Mercer assembled a local search team, 6 officers, 3 town rescue volunteers, and 2 amateur divers, who'd assisted in past river accidents. They brought an old map of Crescent Lake, marking every trail and path to the water's edge. The sun barely rose over the mountains as the pickup trucks left the station, their lights cutting through the misty haze. The dirt road twisted, thickened with mud from the previous night's light rain, slowing their progress. At the old boat dock, where Proctor had spotted faint tire tracks the day before, they deployed. 2 searched the south shore, 4 the north, and the rest used a borrowed wooden rowboat from a local. Crescent Lake's fall waters were cold and deep, its surface flat as a leaden mirror. Pine trees reflected on the water, a light breeze rippling the surface, erasing any potential traces. Proctor stood at the shore, scanning the fishing area with binoculars, but saw no unusual objects. The divers geared up with flashlights, oxygen tanks, and guide ropes, searching the shallow waters just meters from shore. They dove repeatedly, but thick mud clouded visibility to less than 2 feet. Flashlight beams were swallowed by dark silt. On land, Mercer directed the team to widen the search, combing every trail leading to the dock, and checking possible turnaround points. One officer found newer tire tracks, faint but deeper than the previous days, running parallel before stopping abruptly near the water. He knelt, measured the track width, and logged details meticulously. No skid marks, just a straight indentation ending sharply, as if the vehicle lost control or slid on wet ground. Mercer inspected, nodded, and signaled for photos. He said quietly, "Could be them, but we can't be sure." By noon, the fog lifted, revealing the vast, eerily quiet lake. The rowboat team returned, reporting no floating debris, no car parts, no personal items, no oil slicks. They dragged iron hooks along the dock's edge, pulling up old wood, a can, and branches, but nothing tied to the Chevrolet or the missing trio. Sonar wasn't widely available then, so the search relied on eyes and instinct. By afternoon, shifting winds rippled the lake, sunlight glaring off the water, making it harder to spot anything. An officer suggested anchoring a rope to mark the suspected tire tracks for the next day's search. Mercer agreed. He stood silently, staring at the gray cold water, where ripples hit the rocky shore and dissolved. By 5 p.m., the team packed up and returned to the station. In the day's report, Proctor wrote, "No unusual objects or physical evidence found. Tire tracks at the old dock may be related, but insufficient to identify the vehicle." Mercer underlined, "insufficient" in red, and added, "Consider possibility of vehicle sliding into lake. No tools available for underwater search." That night, Crescent fell silent again. Main Street lights dimmed, only faint glows from small shops remaining. In the sheriff's office, the map with red pins sat still on the wall, a thread stretching from Marian's house to the dock, and stopping in the unexplored lake. The first search ended without answers, leaving only a blank spot on the map, and a sense that what they sought lay somewhere beneath the cold water, beyond the reach of flashlights and weary eyes. 10 days after the search campaign began, Crescent Lake returned to its inherent tranquility. The fluttering yellow plastic caution tape, torn and tattered along the damp grassy shore, was the only remnant indicating a large-scale search had taken place here. The local rescue team had scoured the entire area around the lake, from the trails leading to the old dock to the shallow waters along the northern shore. They used grappling hooks, nets, and depth-measuring poles, working in groups from morning to afternoon, but all they retrieved was mud and fallen leaves. The December weather was cold, with strong winds blowing from the western mountains, causing the water temperature to drop rapidly. Each time a diver surfaced, their breath formed white clouds. "Nothing down there but mud," one said, voice hoarse. Mercer stood watching through binoculars, silently nodding, his face expressionless. He knew they couldn't prolong the search indefinitely without concrete evidence. Local newspapers began publishing brief reports about the case, with a few in Bend and Eugene running headlines. 3 Crescent residents mysteriously missing, police suspect lake accident. Public opinion in the town was divided. Some believed they had skidded into the water at night, while others thought the 3 might have encountered something else along the way, or even left for somewhere else. But no one had clearer grounds than vague hypotheses. Mercer and investigator Neil Proctor compiled all collected data, scene photos, area maps, witness statements, faint tire tracks, and dive reports. The case file was less than 20 pages thick, but it was all they had. In the summary sent to the county office, Mercer wrote, "Possible vehicle submersion. No proof." 10 words, concise but encapsulating the impasse of the entire campaign. Without specialized equipment, no sonar, no magnetic scanners, everything relied on human eyes and instinct. They had considered calling in the state's dive team from Salem, but the budget exceeded the county's capacity, and the disappearance wasn't deemed a criminal case. In the final days of the search, no one spoke much. People repeated familiar tasks, checking the shore, probing around the dock, taking photos. All were futile. On the morning of the 10th day, Mercer stood on the hill overlooking the lake, its surface mirror-like, with faint sunlight piercing through the mist. He said quietly to Proctor, "The lake keeps no traces, or we have no way to see them." Proctor didn't respond. He only added to the report's final line, "No further evidence observed." When they returned to headquarters, the equipment boxes were neatly stored, the lake map was rolled up, marked in red ink with the last suspected location, and stamped temporary hold. In the concluding report, Mercer recommended suspending the search due to lack of additional evidence and adverse weather conditions. He signed and stamped it. The file was placed in metal cabinet number 7, second row on the right in the archive room, alongside hundreds of other minor missing persons cases. In the status section, Proctor typed a brief line on the typewriter, "Inactive, pending new evidence." When the archive door closed, the sound of iron hinges echoed in the empty space, ending 10 days of tense, cold and hopeless effort. Outside, the wind blew through the pine forest, dry leaves scattering on the road leading to the lake. Crescent returned to its slow rhythm, as if nothing had happened. But somewhere, In the dark depths of that lake, the answer remained, just out of reach at the time. After the final report was signed, the Crescent Lake disappearance fell into absolute silence. The winter of 1984 passed quickly, with ice covering the lake's surface and snow obscuring all traces. By early 1985, when the ice melted, the Deschutes County Police no longer returned to the scene. Their small headquarters was busy with traffic accidents and summer thefts, and no one mentioned the 3 missing individuals beyond the inactive case note in the archive log. Mercer was reassigned to Bend, and investigator Proctor retired early. The case file, consisting of a few Polaroid photos, a lake area map, and scene reports, was transferred to the county archive, numbered 84 Pinter 197, placed among dozens of other files on an old iron shelf. A handwritten note was taped to the cover, its ink fading over time. Possible accident, no further action. The metal door closed, dust gradually settled on the file's label, and the Crescent Lake case vanished from all annual reports. Over the next 15 years, no new witnesses emerged. No traces washed ashore, no belongings, no license plates, no bodies. Every summer, tourists still came to fish and camp. Children played around the dock, unaware that beneath them lay the site of an unsolved disappearance. Some old Crescent residents occasionally mentioned Howard Lane, the kind mechanic, or Marian Pierce, the elementary school teacher, still remembered by former students. But over the years, those memories faded like the morning mist that often covered the lake. The old dock, where the search team had once set up their command tent, was completely submerged when the water level rose after the lake expansion project in 1989. The shoreline terrain changed, old trails were swallowed by water, and new trees grew, obscuring the dirt path to the water's edge. If someone visited Crescent Lake after 1990, they wouldn't recognize the site of the search. By the late 1990s, the county invested in a new archive facility in Bend. Thousands of old files were transported there by truck, including Case 84 Pinter 197. A young clerk responsible for sorting noted briefly in the inventory, 3 adults missing, presumed accident, file dormant. The case was officially removed from the list of open investigations, moved to the archived cases category. From then on, it was no longer mentioned in any internal meetings. In the media, the disappearance was gradually forgotten, replaced by news of tourism and resort development around the lake. Only a few elderly residents occasionally recounted the story to outsiders, their voices slow as if telling a local legend. 3 people in a green car went for a picnic and never returned. But for Crescent's new generation, it was just an old tale, no different from ghost stories told around campfires. Time piled on, those directly involved aged or left the town. Mercer passed away in 1997. Proctor moved to live with his daughter in Salem. Neither knew that the file they had once signed had grown cold, buried among forgotten cases. By early 2000, when an administrative clerk inventoried the archive, he had to wipe dust to read the label on the file's spine. The ink had nearly faded, leaving only the number 84 Pinter 197. He marked it presumed closed, placed it back on the shelf, unaware that 4 decades later, those words would be reopened. By then Crescent had changed. Old wooden cabins were replaced by resorts. Highway 97 was smoothly paved, and the old dock lay 10 meters deeper under the lake than before. No one in town could precisely recall where Howard, Marian, and Caleb's car was last seen. The disappearance became a gap in collective memory, an unresolved case buried under cold mud and silent ears. 35 years later, in early 2019, a routine review by the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit was conducted at the Bend Archive. The goal was to reassess hundreds of unsolved cases from the 1960s to the early 2000s, identifying those that could be reinvestigated with modern technology. Among the dusty yellowed files, A thin folder numbered 84 Pinter 197 was placed on the desk of Lieutenant Aaron Monroe, who led long-term missing persons investigations. Monroe, with over 15 years of forensic investigation experience and work on DNA-solved cases, had never seen such a sparse file. 19 pages, only 8 with scene notes, and 2 blurry Polaroid photos. No coordinates, no scene diagram, no sealed evidence, and notably, no signed witness statements. She reread the final line of the 1985 summary. Possible vehicle submersion, no proof. A conclusion without basis, just speculation. Monroe measured the hand-drawn distances on the old map, realizing the marked route stopped at the old dock, now submerged after the lake expansion. She wondered why no one had considered returning there in decades. Her report to superiors was concise. Case 84 Pinter 197, likely related to a vehicle submersion accident. No sonar survey conducted. Recommend re-investigating the Crescent Lake scene. 2 weeks later, Monroe received a response from the state director's office. The project was tentatively approved under the Re-Examination of Submersion Cold Cases program, a joint initiative between state police and the Environmental Agency to test multi-frequency sonar and underwater LiDAR. Crescent Lake, with its enclosed terrain and average depth of 80 feet, was deemed an ideal test site. Monroe and a team of technicians traveled to Crescent in late February, when snow still blanketed the hilltops. The town had changed. The old dock was now underwater, wooden cabins had become summer resorts, and residents barely recalled the disappearance. When Monroe asked a coffee shop owner about the 3 names in the file, he shook his head. Sounds familiar, but probably before my time. She returned to her hotel, opened her laptop, and overlaid a new topographic map of Crescent Lake with the 1984 original. The shoreline had receded nearly 40 meters, and the old dock area was fully submerged in deep water. Below, according to civilian LiDAR map measurements, was a natural slope leading to the lake bed, exactly where a fallen vehicle might remain. Monroe drafted a detailed survey plan in 3 phases: sonar scanning for metal objects, LiDAR mapping of the lake bed, and if anomalies were detected, a request for the state dive team to recover. The plan was approved in early March. The Marine Evidence Recovery Unit, MARU, was dispatched to assist, bringing new side-scan sonar, capable of detailed underwater imaging. As the first equipment was lowered into the lake, Monroe stood on the shore, gazing at the calm water, feeling as if she faced a void filled with unanswered questions. In the temporary office near the dock, sonar scans gradually appeared on the screen, sound waves forming black and white images, mud layers, rocks, submerged tree trunks. Each time the screen flashed a metal signal, her heart beat faster. The first 3 days yielded nothing significant, but on the 4th, a 14-foot-long shape with a curved frame appeared in the southwest corner of the lake bed, near the location marked on the old map. Monroe ordered the GPS coordinates saved, and the image sequence captured. She stood silently before the screen, knowing this could be the first clue in a disappearance, thought lost to oblivion for 35 years. The preliminary report was sent that weekend, concluding with a line she typed herself, replacing the vague 1985 conclusion: probable vehicle submersion detected, verification required. In her final note she wrote, "If something lies beneath this mud, Crescent Lake will have to give it back." Once Monroe's preliminary report was approved, the Marine Evidence Recovery Unit MARU was swiftly deployed to Crescent Lake to conduct a detailed survey. That morning, thick fog blanketed the lake's surface, faint light filtering through rows of pines, a gentle breeze rippling the water like a soft breath. At the dock, wooden boats carrying side-scan sonar equipment were lowered into the water amid the low hum of engines. The entire area around the lake was temporarily sealed off, yellow warning signs posted along the paths, and residents were asked to keep their distance. Monroe stood on the command boat, her reflective jacket standing out against the gray fog. She monitored the sonar data display, sound waves forming horizontal streaks, revealing the terrain in black and white, pebbles, fallen tree trunks, thick mud layers, and a few small metallic signals. She focused on the southwestern part of the lake, precisely where an old 1984 map had marked a dock. Two sonar arrays operated simultaneously, covering nearly 70% of the lake's surface. After more than 2 hours, as the images stabilized, a strong signal appeared on the screen, a structure about 14 feet long, with a uniformly reflective surface and distinct edges, tilted in a thick layer of mud. The technician adjusted the contrast, and the familiar curved outline gradually emerged: a domed roof, a vehicle body, and the faint shadow of wheels. Monroe stared at the screen, signaled to log the GPS coordinates, and requested a rescan at a higher frequency for confirmation. The second sound wave returned from the same location, the shape unchanged. The interim report noted, metallic structure detected, approx 14 feet, consistent with vehicle chassis. She ordered the deployment of an ROV, remotely operated vehicle, for direct inspection. The camera was lowered through the cold water, its light beam cutting through the dark silt. The screen flickered slightly as the ROV approached, then paused. The light swept across a curved moss-covered surface, peeling paint, revealing patches of dull gray metal. As the lens panned slowly, a doorframe came into view, part of a shattered window buried in the mud. The vehicle tilted heavily to one side. "Could be a sedan," the technician said in a low voice. Monroe didn't respond, only leaned closer to examine each frame. She ordered a LiDAR scan to create a 3D model of the object, ensuring no detail was missed. Parallel laser beams gradually built the structure, an intact vehicle body, the front end buried in the lake bed, the rear slightly raised. When the model was complete, the shape was unmistakable: a classic car, its length and proportions perfectly matching a Chevrolet Bel Air from the early 1950s. The data was cross-checked with the positioning system, with an error margin under 2 inches. Monroe stood silent for a few seconds, then said, "Mark the area, secure a 50-meter radius." The order was executed immediately, warning stakes placed along the shore, and auxiliary survey boats withdrawn from the zone. The internal report sent to Salem was brief, just 3 lines: probable submerged vehicle, match with archival case 84-2197. Further verification required. She gazed at the lake, where small ripples danced, feeling as though she were facing a memory rising from the past. The team continued surveying the surrounding terrain, measuring depths, and noting areas of sinking mud. Results showed the lake bed in that area sloped at a 15-degree angle, sufficient for a vehicle to slide down and become lodged. A rusted steel pipe, possibly part of an old mooring post, was found near the vehicle's front. As the sunset began to cast an orange glow over the lake, the Imiero boats turned back to shore, gentle waves lapping against their hulls with a mournful sound. Monroe removed her headset and wrote the final note in her notebook: object suspected to be a vehicle, identified as a classic sedan. Prepare salvage procedure, prioritize structural preservation. She looked up at the calm lake, where a piece of an old story had just been revealed, and knew that from tomorrow, Crescent Lake would no longer be a peaceful body of water. After 2 days of lockdown, Crescent Lake was completely still, with only the Imiero team, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe, and a few forensic technicians permitted on site. The sky was leaden gray, light rain falling intermittently, the breeze carrying the chill and the scent of wet pine resin. The salvage plan was approved overnight, and early the next morning, equipment crates were brought to the shore. A floating crane was anchored on the lake, steel cables and specialized lifting airbags prepared. Under Monroe's command, 2 professional state divers descended, equipped with guide ropes and recording cameras. The control boat's screen displayed the camera feed: thick black mud, swaying strands of algae, then the curved vehicle body emerging under the light. They worked in near-zero visibility, feeling their way to attach cables to the vehicle's frame. After over an hour, the radio crackled, cables secured ready to lift. Monroe signaled the crane to start. The engine roared softly, the cables tightened, and the water began to swirl. Mud and silt churned into a murky brown streak. A large object slowly surfaced, water dripping with each lift. As the vehicle's front broke the surface, the team held their breath. A 1952 Chevrolet Bel Air emerged, its emerald green paint nearly eroded, the surface covered in moss, doors jammed shut, windows shattered. The vehicle tilted to the left, with a deep dent in the rear door, a circular mark as if struck hard by a solid object from outside. When the vehicle was placed on a wooden platform near the shore, water and mud poured from both sides. The thick smell of rusted metal and lake mud filled the air. Monroe approached, gloved, and conducted a preliminary inspection around the vehicle. Inside the cabin, mud covered the floor, seat belts were torn, and the steering wheel was broken. A technician used a cutting tool to open the door, which gave way with a metallic screech. Under portable lights, the interior came into view. 3 sets of human remains lay piled in the front and back seats, bones decomposed but still in relative position. An old leather wallet lay on the floor, its leather cracked, containing a faded photo of a woman. Nearby was a silver ring, worn but with faint engraved patterns still visible. In the rear wheel well, a technician found a torn piece of car carpet, its nylon blend fibers typical of 1980s aftermarket products, not original to the Chevrolet. In the trunk, there was a small silver paint can, its lid rusted, the label still legible, marine enamel, olive green. Monroe ordered photos and labeling of each piece of evidence. Everything was placed in sealed, moisture-proof bags, coded by collection order. She stood looking at the vehicle for a moment, her eyes lingering on the dent on the left, a mark indicating an external impact, not consistent with a natural slide into the lake. Struck from outside, she said softly, noting in her book, impact mark left side, external force likely. A technician conducted a preliminary scan of the vehicle, noting multiple horizontal scratches perpendicular to the lake's slope, suggesting the vehicle was pushed or blocked before sliding down. As faint sunlight pierced the clouds, the lake's surface calmed, with only small ripples around the anchor buoys. The crane lowered the vehicle onto an iron platform, covered with a sealed tarp. The entire area was designated a crime scene. Divers returned to the discovery site to search the surrounding area. A small metal frame, resembling an oil pipe, was found a few meters away and sealed for lab analysis. In the temporary office set up on the shore, Monroe signed the scene report, each line written carefully. 3 sets of remains recovered inside vehicle. Items collected: wallet, ring, carpet fragment, paint can. Vehicle shows external impact on left side, broken glass from outside inward. In the preliminary conclusion, she wrote, evidence indicates collision prior to submersion. Recommend reclassification to homicide investigation. The Imiru supervisor agreed and signed off. Case 84 MIDI 2197, officially changed status from missing adults to homicide investigation, active. That night, as the vehicle was loaded onto a truck, its wheels rolled slowly along the wet forest road, red taillights reflecting in the fog, creating a long streak like a cut across the lake's dark backdrop. Monroe watched until the truck disappeared, then closed her notebook. She knew the 35-year-old missing persons case had just emerged from the shadows of the past, and now, it was undeniably a murder investigation. The sealed bags were transported to the Oregon State Forensic Laboratory in Salem, on the same night the Chevrolet was salvaged from Crescent Lake. In the cold storage chamber, the 3 sets of remains were laid out separately on stainless steel tables, numbered according to their position in the vehicle. No one spoke as the first bag was opened, only the sound of wrapping paper and the faint scratch of a pen on a clipboard. Dr. Dana Shu, the state's forensic expert, personally oversaw the examination. She had handled hundreds of old remains cases, but rarely had any been so well preserved after over 3 decades underwater. After cleaning and drying the bones at low temperature, the technicians collected femur and dental samples for DNA extraction. The comparison process used the National Missing Persons Database and archived samples from living family members Monroe had already contacted. Results returned after nearly 2 weeks confirmed the identities of the 3 individuals, Howard Lane, Marian Pierce and Caleb Dunn, matching the genetic profiles with 99.8% accuracy. The detailed forensic report stated, remains consistent with prolonged submersion, cause of death, drowning. Evidence of pre-mortem trauma observed. Trauma marks were highlighted in red on the description, a skull fracture on Howard's left side, broken ribs on Marian, and shoulder bone damage on Caleb, all showing signs of occurring before death. No bullets or knife marks were found, but the trauma patterns indicated a strong external impact, consistent with the dent on the vehicle's left side noted by Monroe at the scene. The interim report concluded, primary cause of death, asphyxia due to submersion. Secondary injuries consistent with vehicular impact. As Monroe read the results at her desk, she remained silent for a long time. The dry numbers in the report painted a vivid picture of that night in 1984. The car struck from the left, losing control and sliding into the lake. The 3 occupants still alive as water poured through the broken windows. A lump rose in her throat, but she kept her voice steady when calling the investigation director. Request to officially reclassify the case from accident to homicide. The order was approved that same day. From that moment, Case 84-MIDI-2197 was no longer a missing persons file, but a full-fledged homicide case. The forensic lab continued analyzing the accompanying evidence. On the small paint can from the trunk, they found dried olive green paint and a faint fingerprint on the inside of the lid. The print was scanned and stored, but no match was made as no suspect profiles existed yet. Chemical analysis revealed the paint contained additives used in mechanical and industrial maintenance, available only at certain lumber yards and old factories in Central Oregon during the 1980s. The mud-stained nylon carpet fragment contained synthetic fibers produced in 1983, typical of commercial truck carpeting, not personal vehicles. Monroe noted in her report, possible contact transfer from another vehicle, larger frame. She began reconstructing the possible sequence of events. According to old statements, the 3 left town in the afternoon, stopped at a gas station at 8 p.m., then vanished. Based on old topographic maps, the route from the gas station to the lake dock was nearly 10 miles, with the final slope steep enough for a car to slide if it lost control. If struck from the left, the Chevrolet could have veered off the road and plunged into the lake in seconds, with no chance to react. But the question remained, who was on the left side of that road at that moment? She reviewed the old case files, yellowed pages with vague witness accounts from 1984. One mentioned seeing unfamiliar headlights near the dock at dusk, but wasn't certain. No license plates, no reports of a collision sound. Monroe closed the file, staring out her office window as fine rain fell. The old case now lit up in her mind, scattered details beginning to connect: the olive green paint, the non-Chevrolet carpet fragment, the left side dent, the pre-mortem injuries. All pointed to one possibility: the car was struck, intentionally, or by a forceful collision. In her personal notebook, she wrote a brief line: not accident, impact before submersion confirmed. That night, as she left the office, the sound of metal screeching underwater echoed in her mind, imagining the classic car sinking slowly through the mud, its headlights fading, and 3 people buried with Crescent Lake's secret for 35 years. But now, with the forensic results in hand, Monroe knew they were finally beginning to speak, in the cold language of evidence. When the forensic report was sent back from Salem to Crescent, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe stayed up nearly all night reviewing the entire chain of evidence collected during the salvage operation. She knew that if the cause of death was a collision before drowning, the answers lay in the smallest details: chipped paint, oil streaks, or a torn carpet fragment that many might dismiss as insignificant. In the field lab's analysis room, sealed bags were opened under cold white lights. A sample of olive green paint was taken from the left side of the Chevrolet, at the edge of a dent. Under an electron microscope, the paint revealed a 3-layer structure, entirely different from the original 2-layer paint of the 1952 Bel Air. The outermost layer was industrial enamel, containing lead and aluminum compounds, characteristic of coatings used on heavy vehicles like trucks or industrial machinery, not civilian paint. Remain spectroscopy confirmed the olive green color matched the GMC fleet line from the 1970s. The report noted, paint trace, non-original, likely from external source. Monroe reviewed the registry of civilian vehicles in Crescent from 1980, 1985. No vehicles matched this paint type except a few commercial trucks servicing factories in the Gilchrist area. She marked GMC, industrial use in the file, and requested further chemical testing of the grease sample collected from the car's chassis. The results immediately caught her attention. The grease sample contained polymerized rosin, commonly used in saws, chains, and industrial lubrication systems at lumber mills. The additive ratio in the sample almost perfectly matched the maintenance formula used by Gilchrist Timber Mill, a large lumber mill less than 10 miles from Crescent. It was the only facility in the area using a custom rosin-based grease made from Oregon pine, leaving a distinctive smell recognizable to anyone in the industry. Monroe asked the forensic team to compare the sample's composition to the state's industrial product database, yielding a 94% match. On the screen, a note appeared: resin compound consistent with Gilchrist Timber Mill lubricant. She leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the wall-mounted map where Gilchrist appeared as a small dot south of Crescent, just a few minutes' drive from the lake. From that moment, the pieces began to fall into place. The paint didn't belong to the Chevrolet, but came from another vehicle, olive green, possibly a truck or technical vehicle. The grease contained rosin, a proprietary product from Gilchrist. The dent on the victim's car indicated a collision from the left, aligned with the direction from the main road to the lake, where only one truck route operated at night, the lumber transport from the mill. Monroe recalled a nearly overlooked note in the 1984 case file. A mill employee had abruptly quit shortly after the 3 disappearances, but no one followed up, because the case was deemed an accident at the time. She reopened the yellowed file, finding a faint handwritten line: maintenance foreman resigned, week after disappearance. No name, just a timestamp. Monroe requested the State Records Department to retrieve the 1984 personnel list from Gilchrist Timber Mill. 2 days later, the data arrived. Only one person left the job at that time: Silas Redmond, maintenance foreman. He had overseen equipment, truck and saw maintenance, with access to the rosin-based grease inventory. Redmond's personnel file noted he left Crescent in 1985, moved to Bend to open a small auto repair shop, and had no further contact with the mill. Monroe printed the file, placing it beside photos of the paint chips and grease, connecting each piece of evidence with red string. The nylon carpet fragment, found in the victim's car, was retested. Results showed polyester blended fibers, a type used in GMC trucks, matching the era and model used by Gilchrist for transport. The carpet piece, lodged in the Chevrolet's wheel well, seemed torn from another vehicle during a collision. The internal report concluded, evidence of vehicle-to-vehicle impact. Paint and material transfer from industrial vehicle. Monroe stared at the assembled board, a picture coming into focus. She imagined that night in 1984, a slick dirt road, the vintage Chevrolet ahead, an olive green industrial truck behind, its headlights cutting through the fog. Perhaps a conflict, perhaps an accident, but a hard impact from the left sent the car plunging into the lake. Reviewing old witness statements, she noticed an odd coincidence: the only person named around that time, working near the lake that night, was Redmond, a truck driver for the mill, with a vehicle matching the confirmed paint and grease. She closed the file, sat still for a few minutes, then called the cold case unit director. "We need to revisit Gilchrist Mill, pull all maintenance records, and verify Redmond." On the other end, a low voice replied curtly, "Do it. If this holds, it's no longer an accident, it's evidence of a collision covered up for 35 years. Monroe hung up, looking out the window. The sunset bathed the pine forest, reflecting the olive green of an old truck in her imagination. Inside the room, the paint chip gleamed under the light, small but enough to bridge past and present, opening a new line of investigation Crescent had long overlooked. After Silas Redmond's name surfaced in the personnel records, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe knew she'd hit the case's linchpin. His name appeared once in the 1984 records, with no statement, no interrogation, just a brief note: maintenance foreman, resigned the month after the disappearance. She decided to go to the source. Gilchrist Timber Mill, now a fading sawmill nestled in the southern pine forest, operated minimally with a few aging workers. Once the region's economic heart, after 30 years, it was reduced to sparse sawing sounds and the smell of rosin mixed with machine oil. Monroe presented her work order, gaining access to technical records and the old supply warehouse. In the manager's office, the storeroom keeper, Hattie Moore, who'd worked there over 40 years, looked up at her with a mix of curiosity and wariness. When Monroe asked about Redmond, Hattie hesitated, then said slowly, "Silas, yeah, he worked here a long time, maintenance foreman, skilled but hot-tempered. In 1984, after the three went missing, he quit suddenly. No one asked why." She pulled out a thick hardcover log book, its pages yellowed. Handwritten blue ink was still legible. "Silas Redmond, maintenance foreman, resigned December 1984. Below was a scrawled signature. Monroe photographed the document, then asked, "Did anyone ever mention a conflict between Redmond and Caleb Dunn?" Hattie froze, eyes drifting to the window where the saws droned steadily. "I remember something. Caleb worked here briefly. He and Redmond argued over shifts or broken machines. I'm not sure. Caleb quit, then that happened." She paused, sighed, and added, "Redmond lost his temper a lot, smashed a toolbox once. People said he had nerve issues from the war." Monroe jotted down every detail, thanked her, and requested access to the old warehouse. In the basement, dim yellow lights illuminated rusty metal oil drums, some still labeled lubricant compound, timber resin mix. The technician with her collected a sample, using a vacuum tool, sealing it carefully. When opened, the sharp rosin smell matched the residue on the Chevrolet's chassis. Monroe labeled it Sample G1, and sent it to the Salem lab. While awaiting results, she tracked down former mill workers, who knew Redmond and Caleb, now retired and scattered around Lapine. One, Jerry Holcomb, recalled, "Silas was always irritated with Caleb. Called him clumsy, blamed him for breaking a saw. But I think it was something else, maybe a debt. I saw them argue loudly in the parking lot once. Redmond slammed Caleb's car door, chipped the paint." The story made Monroe pause. She pressed for timing. "When was this?" Holcomb thought, then said, "Late fall, I think, a few weeks before Caleb disappeared." He gave a sad smile. "We thought they'd made up, but then." Back in Crescent, Monroe received an email from the lab. Sample G1 matched the victim's car grease at 98%, same polymerized rosin, same additive ratio. The report concluded, "Sample consistent with Gilchrist Timber Mill industrial lubricant." She printed the results, placing them beside the paint and carpet photos. Everything now aligned perfectly: olive green paint, from the mill's GMC trucks, proprietary grease, industrial truck cabin carpet. The final piece was Redmond, the only maintenance foreman with access to those supplies, a personal conflict with one of the victims, and a sudden resignation post-disappearance. Before the investigation board, she tied a final red string from Redmond to Gilchrist Mill, then to Impact Paint. All threads converged. In her internal report to superiors, Monroe wrote, Direct correlation between industrial vehicle operated by Redmond and materials found on victim's car. Evidence indicates physical collision consistent with deliberate or reckless act. She requested a summons for Redmond's interrogation. Before sending, she paused, eyeing old 1984 mill photos, rows of olive green trucks parked neatly, one possibly the vehicle that pushed the Chevrolet into the lake. Outside, the afternoon sun gilded the pine forest, its light hitting the office wall where Crescent's map still held red pins. 35 years on, everything had changed, but the truth lay waiting to be touched. Monroe closed the file, writing a final log entry: Redmond, primary suspect. Proceed to interview and background check. After the lab confirmed the Gilchrist Mill grease matched the evidence from the victim's car, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe turned to the final detail: a muddy, torn carpet fragment from the Chevrolet's wheel well. She believed it was the key to closing the technical evidence chain, a small material that could directly point to the colliding vehicle's origin. In the lab, the carpet was examined under a spectrographic microscope, identifying polyester nylon blended fibers, densely woven, used in commercial truck cabs, not civilian cars. Analysis showed the fiber structure matched Fleet Tech's Series C industrial carpet, produced in Tacoma in 1983, and distributed limitedly to heavy vehicle maintenance dealers in the Northwest. Monroe checked records of dealers operating, then finding only 4. One caught her eye: Redmond Auto and Marine, a small garage in Bend's outskirts, matching the name of the prime suspect, Silas Redmond, and registered in 1983, just before the disappearance. She drove to Bend on a windy afternoon, the new asphalt road flanked by Oregon's timeless pines. Redmond Auto and Marine had long closed, its weathered wooden sign dangling on an iron gate. Inside, light through roof cracks revealed dusty tool racks and scattered old oil drums. She photographed the scene, then contacted the state tax agency for 1983, 1985 invoices and purchase logs. A week later, the cold case unit received the records. Among the old papers was an invoice, dated October 10, 1984, 2 days before the disappearances, signed by Silas Redmond. Item: Fleet Tech's floor mat, Series C gray-black blend, quantity 2. Each mat fit the cabin of a 1976 GMC truck, the industrial model Redmond maintained and used at Gilchrist Mill. Monroe pinned a copy of the invoice to the investigation board, a red line connecting it to the torn muddy carpet photo. The lab's technical report confirmed the sample matched the invoice product. Fiber thickness, weave pattern, and surface structure were a 100% match. A material analyst concluded, contact transfer likely occurred during collision. Carpet fragment consistent with GMC truck interior. With this, Monroe had 3 unified evidence chains: olive green paint, matching the mill's GMC fleet trucks; rosin-based grease, unique to Gilchrist Timber Mill, where Redmond worked; and the carpet fragment purchased by Redmond 2 days before the disappearance. She sat before the investigation board, red strings closing the circle around Redmond's name. In her mind, she replayed that 1984 night: a winding dirt road to the lake, the vintage Chevrolet ahead, an olive green truck's headlights flashing behind. Perhaps Redmond drove that GMC, old anger with Caleb Dunn pushing him to lose control, a hard side impact sending the lighter car sliding down a muddy slope, vanishing under cold water. The paint, grease, carpet, all told the same story, no witness needed. Monroe kept her tone calm, presenting to superiors, but she knew the case no longer rested on hypotheticals. Physical evidence formed a tight, unbreakable chain, incompatible with the old accident label. In her report, she wrote, "Physical evidence establishes direct link between Redmond and impact vehicle. Chain of material transfer, paint, lubricant, carpet, confirms contact event consistent with collision." The report, sent with all forensic photos and invoice copies, was stamped priority. Re-investigation required. That same day, Monroe returned to Gilchrist to check old maintenance logs. In the records room, she found a faint note in the October 1984 equipment log. GMC K10, left side panel repaired. Paint order #4319, olive enamel. The line all but confirmed Redmond's truck was damaged on the left and repainted days after the disappearance. With paint, grease, carpet, timing and location aligned, the fit was chillingly precise. That night, in the quiet office, Monroe pinned Redmond's personnel photo to the board. A middle-aged man's face, cold eyes, a slight smirk. Below, she wrote in red, "Primary suspect, vehicle confirmed." Outside, rain pattered on the tin roof, each drop a steady tick like a countdown. Crescent Lake was no longer a mystery of the past, it was speaking, and Silas Redmond's name emerged under the white light of the investigation room, where 35 years of silence ended with an undeniable chain of evidence. When the final chain of evidence was confirmed, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe believed the case had sufficient grounds to reconstruct the collision mechanism. She wanted to know exactly how the impact occurred, how the Chevrolet Bel Air ended up in the lake, and whether it could have been an accident, as Redmond had claimed, or a deliberate act. At the Oregon State Police Forensic Reconstruction Unit's Technical Analysis Room in Salem, all data was inputted into specialized 3D simulation software. The 1984 Crescent Lake terrain model, slope, location of the old dock, and technical specifications of the two vehicles, a 1952 Chevrolet Bel Air and a 1976 GMC K10. Under the blue glow of the screen, the simulation emerged with details down to every meter of the road, recreating the fateful night setting. The technical team entered collision parameters based on dents in the vehicle's body, paint transfer directions, and the victim's injury patterns. Analysis revealed the impact point was on the left rear door, at a height matching the front of the GMC truck, with an estimated impact force generated at a speed of approximately 18 to 22 miles per hour, sufficient to deform the car's frame without destroying its entire body. When the software ran the first test, the simulated car was pushed off the dirt road, rotated 45 degrees, and slid down the slope toward the lake. The terrain's incline at the dock area was determined to be 14 degrees, with low surface friction due to wet mud, causing the car to slide uncontrollably. All parameters perfectly matched the real-world findings: the car's leftward tilt, nose-down position, and rear wheels buried in mud. A second simulation with a different impact angle and lower speed yielded no significant change. Any impact from the left with equivalent force led to a trajectory into the water. Monroe stood beside the technician, closely observing the slow-motion frames. The screen's light reflected on her face, as the simulated Chevrolet slid off the dock's edge, ripples forming on the water before sinking into virtual mud. She knew it was only a reconstruction, but the sound of the impact felt almost real. After the software completed the kinetic energy estimation, the technical team recalculated G-force and inertia impacts on the car's occupants. The results showed the left side passenger sustained direct head and chest injuries, fully consistent with the pre-mortem injuries of Howard Lane and Marian Pierce recorded in the forensic report. No evidence indicated brake or engine failure in the Chevrolet. All traces pointed to an external collision from a larger vehicle. The technical report, over 40 pages long, concluded in bold, collision dynamics consistent with deliberate contact or reckless operation. Vehicle trajectory confirms external impact prior to submersion. Monroe read the final sentence repeatedly, a heavy feeling settling in her chest. For months, she had pieced together every fragment, paint, oil, carpet, records to reach this point. The impact was not accidental. She requested a reconstruction incorporating real terrain imagery and October 1984 meteorological data. The screen displayed a foggy night, a slick dirt road, and headlights cutting through the mist. As the GMC K10 approached from the left, the distance between the vehicles narrowed to 7 feet. A slight steer at 20 miles per hour created precise contact with the Chevrolet's rear door, strong enough to knock it off course. In reality, the driver could clearly see the car ahead. There were no signs of skidding or evasion. If Redmond was indeed in that truck, the collision could not have been random. Monroe asked the technical team to run additional simulations based on two scenarios: accidental and intentional collision. In the first, the truck lost control on the slick road. With unstable contact angles and dispersed force, the Chevrolet only slid slightly, insufficient to plunge into the lake. In the second, the truck maintained a straight path, slightly accelerating before impact with force precisely concentrated on the left rear, pushing the smaller car off the road and down the slope in the exact recorded trajectory. The simulation stopped at the image of the car hitting the water, ripples spreading, then fading. Monroe nodded slightly, concluding, intentional or at the very least reckless behavior with clear awareness of consequences. In her report to the Cold Case Unit commander, she summarized, based on physical evidence and 3D reconstruction, the event cannot be classified as accidental. Collision from left side with controlled trajectory indicates intentional or reckless act causing death. The report included the simulation video and terrain scan data as visual evidence for the prosecution file. When the documents were printed, Monroe flipped to the first page, where Case 84 Meteor 2197, Crescent Lake Homicide Investigation was bolded. Everything was now clear. The impact from the olive-colored truck not only sent the Chevrolet into the lake, but also buried 3 lives in silence for 35 years. That evening, back at the Crescent office, she replayed the simulation video on a small screen. The sound of wind, the collision, and water splashing through the speakers felt like echoes from the past. She watched each frame, the headlights, the steering shift, the vintage car sinking, as if witnessing the event unfold before her eyes. Outside the window, rain began to fall, drops rhythmically hitting the tin roof. She closed the laptop and wrote the final line in her investigation notebook: "The collision has been reconstructed. No more doubts, the crime has taken shape." With the collision analysis report completed and approved, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe knew it was time to confront the man at the center of it all, Silas Redmond. A summons was signed that day, and 2 officers were dispatched to Bend to bring him to the state investigation headquarters. At 72, Redmond lived alone in a wooden house on the outskirts, retired early after years running a garage. He showed no surprise when police knocked, only glanced through the frosted glass, nodded silently, and said hoarsely, "I knew this day would come." In the interrogation room, cold white light shone on the metal table. Redmond sat across from Monroe, hunched, his calloused hands clasped. Before him was a neatly arranged stack of photos: olive paint on the Chevrolet's body, industrial carpet fragments, a paint can, and a printout of the 3D collision simulation. Monroe began in a calm, even tone, "Mr. Redmond, we've matched evidence from the 1984 disappearance. Paint, grease, carpet, all trace back to a vehicle you used." Redmond stared at the photo, lips pressed tight. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not involved," he replied, his voice faltering. Monroe nodded slightly, flipping to another page, an image of the restored GMC K10 found in his garage, its left side welded with fresh metal. "Can you explain why the paint on your truck matches the traces found on the Chevrolet recovered from Crescent Lake?" she asked. Redmond exhaled heavily, trying to stay composed. "I worked in a shop. That paint was used on dozens of vehicles. Matching colors isn't strange." Monroe didn't react, only slid forward a copy of an October 10, 1984, invoice with his signature, purchasing 2 Fleet Tex carpet pieces, the same type found in the victim's car. Redmond's eyes wavered. He picked up the paper, staring as if disbelieving his own signature. "That was stock for the garage." "I don't remember," he said quietly. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the recording camera. Monroe slowly placed an old photo of Caleb Dunn on the table. "You worked with Caleb at Gilchrist Mill. Any conflicts between you two?" Redmond looked up, his gaze flashing. "That kid, he broke my machine. wouldn't own up. But that's old news, I forgot about it. Did you? Monroe replied evenly, opening a file and reading aloud a witness statement from Jerry Holcomb. I saw Redmond and Caleb arguing in the parking lot. He slammed Caleb's car door. Paint chipped off. The air grew thick. Redmond stayed silent, fingers tapping lightly on the table, head bowed. After a pause, he said hoarsely, I saw them that night. They were together. I just talked to them. Where? Monroe asked. Near the old dock. I was driving by, saw their lights. I stopped, but they didn't want to talk. She tilted her head, voice still soft. Then what happened? Redmond avoided her gaze. It was foggy. The road was slick. I meant to back up, but I might have hit them. I didn't mean to. It was an accident. Monroe didn't respond, just watched him for a long moment, then said quietly, you know that impact killed 3 people, and you left the mill soon after. Redmond closed his eyes, hands clenching. I didn't think they died, he whispered, as if confessing to himself. I thought they'd get out. I was scared, so I left. Days later, I didn't dare tell anyone. My truck was dented, I fixed it, then quit. The camera recorded every word. Monroe kept her tone steady. So you confirm you saw them that night, and a collision occurred near Crescent Lake's dock. Redmond nodded, eyes sunken, voice raspy. Yes, but I didn't kill anyone. I just lost control. She took notes, signed them, then said, your statement is recorded and documented. From now, this case is a criminal investigation. You have the right to remain silent, and have an attorney. As 2 officers entered, Redmond didn't resist, only bowed his head, shoulders trembling slightly. The door closed with a dry click of the lock. In the empty room, Monroe gathered the photos, her gaze lingering on the 3D simulation, the vintage car plunging into the lake, ripples spreading then vanishing. She knew Redmond's bowed head wasn't just an old man's admission, but the end of 35 years of silence the lake had held until today. The morning after the interrogation, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe submitted the full audio and video of Silas Redmond's statement to the Deschutes County prosecutor. The lines I might have hit them, and I was scared, so I left were underlined in red on the transcript. Based on the indirect admission, and the chain of forensic evidence, the county court promptly approved a search warrant for Redmond's residence and former auto shop. That afternoon, 2 police vehicles and a forensic team arrived at the small wooden house on the outskirts of Bend, where he had lived for the past 20 years. In the yard, dry leaves covered the path, and the air reeked of motor oil and rust. The house looked peaceful, but behind the door was an old garage where Monroe believed traces of that 1984 night remained. She presented the warrant. Redmond sat quietly in the living room, eyes sunken, offering no resistance. When the garage door opened, dust swirled thickly. Beneath a heavy tarp, the forensic team uncovered an olive-colored GMC K10, its license plate removed. Flashlights revealed welded patches and fresh paint, not yet faded. On the left side, at the exact position corresponding to the dent on the Chevrolet, was a nearly foot-long cold weld, its uneven surface indicating manual repair. A technician crouched, scraping paint samples with a scalpel, sealing them in labeled tubes. His face tensed as he whispered, "Olive, matches GMC fleet code." Monroe didn't respond, only stared at the truck, gripping her notebook tightly. In a corner of the garage, they found a box of industrial paint supplies, including the same marine enamel, olive green, discovered in the Chevrolet's trunk under Crescent Lake. Everything was photographed, numbered and sealed on site. Hours later, lab results from Salem confirmed an absolute match between the GMC K10's paint and the evidence from the scene. The report stated, paint layers identical in chemical composition and pigment ratio. Transfer confirmed. The evidence chain was now complete. Paint from Redmond's truck on the Chevrolet, pine resin-laced grease from Gilchrist Mill, carpet he purchased 2 days before the incident, and now the collision vehicle itself. Monroe stepped out of the garage, watching the afternoon light filter through the pines, the wind rustling the yellow crime scene tape around the yard. She signaled 2 officers to handcuff Redmond. He didn't resist, only murmured, "I knew this would come back to find me." His voice was hoarse and shaky, his gaze lost in the distance. Monroe read the arrest order clearly. "Silas Redmond, you are under arrest for manslaughter in the first degree, and tampering with evidence in connection to Case 84-2197, Crescent Lake homicide." At the word homicide, he closed his eyes, lips trembling, but said nothing more. The forensic team continued searching the backyard shed, where old parts were stored. In a wooden cabinet, they found a thick oil-stained logbook with a maintenance list for Gilchrist Mill vehicles, many pages torn out. On one remaining page, a scrawled handwritten note made Monroe pause: GMC #K10, weld left panel, 11/1984. This additional evidence was photographed and sealed, further strengthening the prosecution's case. As Redmond was led to the police car, neighbors gathered along the road, their eyes a mix of confusion and curiosity. They knew him only as a quiet old mechanic. None suspected this rundown house held the end of Crescent's haunting 35-year disappearance. At county headquarters, Redmond was placed in a holding cell, utterly silent. Monroe submitted all evidence with the search report, signing the evidence chain completed section. In her report to the prosecutor, she wrote, "Recovered vehicle directly matches forensic profile from submersion site. Mechanical and chemical consistency, confirmed source of collision." As she signed her name, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. For 35 years, Crescent had lived with a secret beneath its lake. Now the truth had a clear shape: an olive truck with a cold weld on its left side, and the man who drove it through the foggy night of 1984. As the police car rolled away from the house, the sun dipped behind the mountains, leaving only the red glow of taillights on the damp road. Redmond sat silently in the back, head bowed. Monroe stood on the garage porch, gazing at the shuttered wooden house, long shadows of trees stretching across the ground. Everything felt strangely quiet. She knew the case's journey wasn't over. Court, sentencing, and the echoes of delayed justice lay ahead. But in that moment, as night fell, she realized Crescent was finally beginning to speak the truth it had hidden for half a lifetime. Silas Redmond's trial took place at the Deschutes County Courthouse in early summer, nearly 40 years after the fateful night by Crescent Lake. The courtroom was packed, the back rows filled with local reporters, townsfolk, and a few elderly relatives of the 3 victims from years ago, their faces stern but resolute. At the defendant's bench, Redmond sat still, his gray prison jumpsuit wrinkled, silver hair falling over his forehead. He looked at no one, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Across the room, Prosecutor Janet Russell stood before the wooden podium, arranging a thick stack of files and crime scene photos spread across the table. Her voice was low, steady, resonating through the room as she began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, today we address a case buried for 35 years. This was no accident. It was the consequence of reckless actions and a conscious effort to conceal guilt." She displayed a 3D reconstruction from simulation software. A turquoise Chevrolet Bel Air struck on the left, spinning before sliding into the lake. Layers of data appeared: impact angle, speed, inertia, body positions. Each frame was backed by forensic reports: Howard Lane's skull fracture, Marian Pierce's broken ribs, Caleb Dunn's shattered shoulder, all perfectly matching the direction of the impact. Next came the chain of evidence: olive green paint samples from the victim's car matching Redmond's GMC K10 truck, custom pine tar oil from Gilchrist Mill, where he once worked as maintenance supervisor, a carpet fragment identical to one purchased with a receipt he signed 2 days before the disappearance, and the restored truck with cold welds on the left side, traces of a concealed collision. Each piece of evidence was placed in a glass case, spotlighted, silencing the courtroom. Prosecutor Russell pointed to a display board linking the evidence. "This is no longer speculation. This is a chain of physical evidence connecting the 1984 scene to the defendant sitting before you. She paused, her voice slower. 3 people left for a picnic. They never returned, and the only person with motive, opportunity and means was Silas Redmond. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man named Gregory Hall, stood to counter. He argued the incident was an unfortunate accident, and that Redmond did not intend to cause harm, only fled out of fear. He claimed there was no direct witness, and that the passage of time weakens evidence. Hall emphasized Redmond's cooperation and admission of encountering the victims that night, an act of honesty, not criminality. He concluded firmly, "You cannot convict a man based on paint chips and faded memories." Russell responded with the cold precision of a seasoned prosecutor. She displayed a slow-motion video simulation of the collision alongside an impact energy chart. "This is not memory. This is science," she said. "Physics does not lie." Then she played a recorded interrogation of Redmond. "I might have hit them. I was scared and left." The words echoed through the room, amplified by the microphone, leaving many breathless. Russell faced the jury. An innocent person does not hide for 35 years. An innocent person does not weld over dents, repaint a truck, or conceal evidence in their garage. On the 3rd day, forensic experts testified. Dr. Dana Tu presented DNA results and pre-mortem injuries. A materials technician confirmed the paint structure matched perfectly between the vehicles. A 3D simulation expert explained the impact mechanics, affirming the collision could not have been a light touch, as the defendant claimed. Every piece of data supported one conclusion: the Chevrolet was deliberately pushed into the lake. When Redmond was allowed to speak, he stood, voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to stop them to talk. I didn't think they'd die. I was wrong to leave, but I'm not a murderer." His words hushed the room. Monroe, seated in the witness section, looked at the frail old man bowing before justice, feeling no relief, only a chill like the wind over the lake years ago. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury retreated to the deliberation room. 6 hours later they returned. The 4 persons stood, voice firm. "We find guilty on all counts." No one clapped or spoke. Redmond bowed his head, eyes closed. Prosecutor Russell exhaled deeply, while Monroe sat silently, hands gripping her file. The judge delivered the preliminary verdict. Silas Redmond is convicted of first-degree manslaughter and tampering with evidence. The final sentence will be announced next week. As Redmond was led away, camera flashes lit up. Outside the hallway, reporters crowded, townsfolk whispered. One reporter asked Monroe, "Do you believe this is justice for them?" She replied softly, "Justice doesn't come on time, but at least it comes." She glanced back at the courtroom door, where 35 years of Crescent's history had just closed with 2 simple heavy words: guilty. A week after the jury's guilty on all counts verdict, the Deschutes County Courthouse held the final sentencing in a heavy atmosphere. Gray skies and light rain fell outside, the wind whistling through the pines like an echo of Crescent's silent years. Silas Redmond was led into the courtroom, hands cuffed, face gaunt, silver hair disheveled. He sat at the defendant's bench, looking at no one, head bowed in wait. Before the judge's bench, prosecutor Janet Russell spoke briefly. The defendant not only caused the deaths of 3 people, but hid his guilt for 35 years. His actions betrayed trust and justice. Defense attorney Gregory Hall maintained his stance, saying in a low voice, "He did not intend to kill, it was an accident, and human fear." But his weak defense dissolved in the silent room. Judge Eleanor Briggs looked at the thick file, her voice calm but firm. "This court acknowledges irrefutable evidence. This was not a mere mistake, but a deliberate act of concealment, destroying evidence and delaying justice for nearly 4 decades." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the public benches where Monroe sat, then read clearly. Under Oregon Revised Statutes 163.11, 8 and 162.295, defendant Silas Redmond is sentenced to 25 years in prison for first-degree manslaughter, with additional penalties for tampering with evidence. The sentence is effective immediately. The gavel's strike echoed, freezing the room. Redmond showed no reaction, only lifting his head, eyes sunken, then nodding slightly, as if accepting his fate. As two officers cuffed him, he turned to Monroe, lips moving silently. She met his gaze in silence. Outside, rain fell, reporters scrambled to record, and that afternoon's Bend Bulletin headline read bold: "Justice surfaces from Crescent Lake, cold case solved, after 35 years." Experts called it Oregon's first case, where primary evidence was established through underwater sonar and LiDAR, setting a legal precedent for similar submerged investigations. After the sentencing, the Oregon State Police announced a new underwater evidence protocol, using Crescent Lake as the official case study. In an accompanying note, Judge Briggs wrote, "Technology does not replace justice, but it helps us hear the truth from places thought silent." Her words were quickly quoted in forensic conferences and became a reminder for cold case units statewide. When asked for her thoughts, Monroe said softly, "Sonar shows us shapes, but persistence brings answers." She returned to Crescent after the trial, standing silently on the slope overlooking the now calm lake, its clear water reflecting a pale blue sky. A small memorial plaque stood on the north shore, engraved with the names Howard Lane, Marian Pierce, and Caleb Dunn, and the words, "Gone, but not forgotten." Locals left flowers, some elderly stood quietly, one whispering, "They're finally home." In her small cold case unit office, Monroe signed the final report, Case 84, 2197, closed, verdict confirmed, justice served. She closed the file, placed it on the metal rack. Outside, the rain stopped, and late daylight shimmered on the lake, reflecting like a quiet mirror. After nearly 40 years, Crescent Lake had finally returned the voice it held for half a lifetime, and justice, though late, had risen from its depths. Silas Redmond's 25-year sentence closed the oldest case in Deschutes County history, but its ripples spread through the small town of Crescent. In the days following the trial, coffee shops, gas stations and roadside stores buzzed with talk. Some sighed in relief. It's finally over. Those three souls can rest. Others shook their heads, arguing Redmond's guilt didn't warrant half a lifetime in prison for an old frail man. Crescent, once accustomed to the peace of its forests and lake, now stood divided between those who believed in justice and those who saw only a tragedy stretched too long. Local papers published analyses, and Oregon News called it the rise of forensic science from the shadows of the past. Investigators statewide sent congratulations to the cold case unit, praising Monroe for turning sonar into the eyes of justice. The following week, the Oregon State Police released a technical report titled Underwater Evidence Protocol. The over 100-page document outlined standardized procedures for using sonar, LiDAR, and ROVs in underwater criminal investigations. On the first page, a bold note read, "Case reference Crescent Lake, 1984, 2019. The case became the first forensic precedent included in state police training. In the introduction, Monroe was named as the proposer of the reinvestigation and the first field commander to prove the feasibility of lakebed scanning technology. The report stated, sonar not only identifies objects, but combined with terrain data and impact analysis, can accurately reconstruct crimes obscured by time. On the report's release day, Monroe attended a press conference in Salem, her face calm beside the police chief. When reporters asked how she felt after the case closed, she said, "We don't search for the guilty, we search for the truth, and the truth never disappears." Her words appeared in most articles about the case. Soon after, neighboring states adopted similar protocols for long unsolved disappearances, making Crescent Lake a symbol of a new era in underwater investigation. In Crescent, life slowly returned to normal, but traces of the case lingered. The town's coffee shop displayed a framed Bend Bulletin article with the headline, "Justice Surfaces from Crescent Lake." On the lake shore, where the Marian team once set up their command tent, a small memorial plaque bore the names Howard Lane, Marian Pierce, and Caleb Dunn, the three whose disappearance had once cast a shadow over the community. Daily, visitors stopped to read, photograph, and leave flowers on the water. Beneath, the mud that once hid the Chevrolet had been cleared, restoring the lake's eerie calm. Yet not everyone found peace after the verdict. Howard Lane's daughter said on television, "I know he's gone, but now I have a place to bring flowers." Caleb Dunn's brother, quieter, said only, "Forgiving isn't forgetting. We just want to remember them right." Even some former Gilchrist mill workers were shocked to hear Redmond's name, the once dedicated supervisor now revealed as the center of a tragedy. One said tearfully, "We worked together for years. No one knew he carried that secret." Monroe didn't return to Crescent immediately after closing the case. She spent months compiling data and writing training reports for the cold case unit. On her desk, the Case 84-2197 file was labeled red, closed, solved. Inside, faded 1984 Polaroids sat beside sharp 2019 sonar scans, two eras, nearly 4 decades apart, telling one story. Each time she flipped through, it felt like seeing two sides of the same truth, one darkness, the other illuminated by technology. By year's end, at a state review meeting, Monroe was honored for outstanding contributions to forensic investigation. Asked to speak, she said briefly, "No technology finds justice on its own. We find it by believing everything buried can be brought to the surface." The room applauded, but she only bowed her head, eyes on a small map in the stage's corner, marked with a green dot named Crescent Lake. Months later, she returned to the town. On a fall afternoon, the lake was calm, the sky streaked with pale gold. She stopped at the old dock where the Marian team had anchored their boats, then dropped a single white flower onto the water. No sound broke the silence, but the gentle lapping of waves. She whispered, as if to herself, 40 years later, the lake gave back its secret. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp air, ripples spreading and fading, leaving the lake in absolute stillness. There, amid nature and memory, Crescent had closed its darkest chapter, a case thought forgotten, now a lasting testament that truth, no matter how deeply submerged, will rise to the surface. The Crescent Lake case is not just a decades-long investigation resolved, but a reflection of core American values, where justice, accountability, and faith in science remain society's foundation. In this case, Lieutenant Aaron Monroe had no magic, only persistence and belief that truth buried beneath a lake could be found. She represents ordinary yet steadfast Americans who trust justice may come late, but never vanishes. Her actions, alongside the OSP's Underwater Evidence Protocol, show how America relies on science and technological innovation to unlock what time has buried, a symbol of the never-stop searching spirit in fields from criminal investigation to community life. But Crescent Lake also reminds us of humanity's darker side. Silas Redmond, in a moment of anger and fear, chose silence for 35 years. He not only took lives but stole the chance for truth to emerge sooner. It's a painful lesson that evading responsibility doesn't erase mistakes, it only compounds their weight over time. In an America that speaks of fairness and truth, this story underscores that justice comes not just from courts or police, but from individual choices, to face, to correct, and to believe that truth, though submerged, is worth bringing to light. Thank you for following the belated journey to justice at Crescent Lake, where truth finally rose from the depths after 40 years of silence. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cases thought dormant, but waiting to be told in future videos.